So thanks again for being here with us. You know that today's webinar is focused on stakeholder outreach to school district leaders around the opportunities to use funds to support environmental education through the Every Student Succeeds Act, particularly in the 2018-2019 school year. And before we get started, I'm just going to remind those of you who I might not know that I'm Sarah Bodor, Director of Policy and Affiliate Relations at NAAEE. And while I am by no means an expert on education policy, I have been tracking the development and the passage and the implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act for a number of years now. And I'm working to provide information and tools to the EE community that we hope will help efforts to leverage the unique opportunity offered by this legislation. So on the webinar today, I'll briefly review the background on where EE fits in the overall ESSA legislation, hopefully not too redundant for most of you. But then I'll talk a little bit about why right now is a good time to reach out to school district superintendents about their ESSA plans for next year, and then point you to some tools for effectively communicating with those district leaders. We're recording the webinar today, and you're welcome to share the recording with your networks or others you think might be interested. Since you registered for the webinar, you'll get a direct link to that recording when it's posted. Before we get started, we have the usual housekeeping basics. Please use the chat box for questions throughout. And your chat box should appear on the right-hand side when you click on the link at the toolbar at the top of your screen. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's just get started. So as I said, I just want to review the basics for anyone who's not familiar or up to speed with the Every Student Succeeds Act. Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA or ESSA, whatever you want to call it, is the latest iteration of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which is the comprehensive federal K-12 policy in the United States. This is the bill that was previously known as No Child Left Behind. And ESSA marks a really exciting first for our field, which is the explicit inclusion of environmental education as a program eligible for funding through the U.S. Department of Education. The fact that this language appears in the bill is a true win for EE, as it reflects a recognition that environmental education holds value for improving a child's education. So here's where the key language for EE sits in the overall bill. Title IV of the bill is entitled 21st Century Schools, as you can see here. And there are two grant programs in Title IV. Part A, which you can see is called Student Success and Enrichment Activities, is a grant program that consolidates a bunch of programs and activities, including environmental education and hands-on, field-based, and service learning STEM activities. And then there's Part B, which is a continuation of the 21st Century Community Learning Centers that some of you may be familiar with. These support after-school and out-of-school time programming, which now, for the first time, includes environmental literacy. But for the purposes of today's webinar, we're really just going to focus specifically on Title IV, Part A. The process and timeline for Part B, 21st Century Community Learning Centers grants is slightly different. And so we're going to drill down into Part A just a little bit. So focusing on the student success and enrichment activities, there are a few categories of activity that are funded by these grants. There are activities focused on safe and healthy learning environments. So think wellness programs, anti-bullying, and other kinds of activities that fit in this category. And then there are a bunch of well-rounded education activities that include environmental education. This is also where that STEM language that I mentioned just a minute ago is found. This grant pool also includes support for technology in schools. Now, a major shift for ESSA overall is that school districts have much more authority and flexibility for how funds are used than under No Child Left Behind. And we see that in the Title IV, we see that really clearly in the Title IV programs, where within certain parameters established by the law, administrators have broad flexibility for how they're going to use these funds. And this is why, you know, now that we're seeing ESSA implemented, a lot of the advocacy work and outreach really is going to happen at the state, but even more so at the local level. So Title IV Part A funds are distributed by formula from the U.S. Department of Education to each state. And then each state, in turn, block grants funds to the local education agencies. And what we have found in our conversations with school districts around the country is that many districts just don't know that environmental education is an activity that is eligible for funding under ESSA. So it's really important that EE providers are partnering and sharing information with their LEAs or local education agencies about this opportunity. So just briefly on the budget, the total authorization for Title IV Part A under the law is $1.65 billion. But during the first year of implementation in fiscal year 2017, the budget only included $400 million. And that was obviously really disappointing because many districts effectively didn't receive enough funding to make much of an impact in any particular area. The good news, though, is that the FY18 budget agreement included $1.1 billion, nearly 3 times as much. So we're really looking at the 2018-2019 school year as the first meaningful opportunity in many places to leverage funds for environmental education under this relatively new legislation. I do just want to mention this needs assessment component of Title IV. It's triggered by the allocation to a district of $30,000 or more. And the assessment itself is really broadly defined or not prescripted in any way, but it must address the elements needed to create a safe and healthy learning environment, to provide access to a well-rounded education, and to address the effective use of technology. Now, something to keep in mind in thinking about supporting EE through ESSA funding is that the notion of a well-rounded education is actually mentioned many times throughout the legislation. I think it's mentioned 23 times, but I'm going to have to double check my count on that. But in each of the instances where funding is linked to this idea of a well-rounded education, the eligible activities that are listed in Title IV-A also apply. So, for example, part of a district's Title II funding, and Title II is the title that provides funding for teacher professional development. Part of a district's Title II funding could be used to support professional development for teachers to improve their ability to provide a well-rounded education. In other words, teacher professional development that is environmental education related would be fundable under Title II. So we've really been advised and encouraged by the folks we've talked to at the U.S. Department of Education to think broadly about the bill in terms of the way in which the different titles could kind of be connected to one another in order to support a well-rounded education. So with that background, this is where we are today. In the coming weeks or months, states will release an application for local education agencies to complete in order to receive their ESSA formula funds. Even though the funds are not competitive, the application is still required to demonstrate the district's intention to use the funds for eligible activities. And then the federal government will distribute funds to the states by July 1. So there's a little bit of overlapping activity happening there where the states are getting ready to ask LEAs to apply, but they're also waiting to receive the funding from the U.S. Department of Education. Then later in the summer and on into the fall, state education agencies will approve the local education agency plans and will distribute the funds. Now, I can just say from my own experience that states sometimes move more slowly than the timeline might indicate in terms of distributing funds to the local level. But this is the general timeline that states should be adhering to. And that's why now, and over the next several weeks and months, is a great time to reach out to your local district administrators about their ESSA planning. Now, in terms of getting involved with outreach to state and local district education leaders, obviously your outreach is going to be most effective and will go farther faster if you already have existing relationships with school district administrators. Start with decision makers you already know, or with districts that have prioritized environmental education somehow. And in reaching out to them because you already have a relationship, use that relationship as a learning opportunity. Learn as much as you can about the decision-making process they're using for planning and the best points of influence. ESSA is specifically designed to engage stakeholders in some of the district planning processes at different points. And so these are good questions to be asking. When can stakeholders engage and how often throughout the process? In particular, if you're in a state or a district that has a statewide environmental literacy plan or a district sustainability plan or any other type of goals or priorities that have been established for environmental literacy, then you have a really strong case to make that ESSA offers a new chance to really advance those plans and goals. So we know that across the country, many of you are in states where there is an environmental literacy plan or there's been some other driver to try to advance environmental literacy. But this is the first time that there are dedicated funds to the U.S. Department of Education that could help make that happen. And this is also going to be an opportunity to forge or strengthen new relationships between the environmental education community and local education agencies. And so we've compiled tools for outreach and for making the case for EE that we hope that you'll be able to use. Now, don't laugh, the talking points that we've prepared and posted on our website are a lot more detailed and nuanced than this, but this is the super high level of what you want to be able to communicate. First, as I've already said, many may not even be aware that EE is an eligible activity under Title IV. So the first step is making them aware of the fact that it is included as part of a well-rounded education, and that the language around hands-on field-based service learning activities to promote STEM skills is also a nod to the type of education that EE provides. And I just want to point out that the U.S. Department of Education issued guidance some time ago to the states on Title IV Part A and called out environmental education specifically. So district leaders don't even have to just take your word for it. The guidance document and a summary of the environmental education references is available on our website as well. And then next, you'll want to make the case for how EE benefits students. The EE Works research analysis that was conducted for NAAEE by Stanford University will help you do that. You can emphasize the ways in which environmental education will help address the next generation science standards if you're in a state or district that has adopted those. And then of course, emphasizing the ways in which environmental education helps promote civic engagement, STEM learning, and develop critical thinking and problem solving skills are all ways in which you'll be able to paint a picture of how environmental education is going to help school districts achieve their other goals for students, as well as truly meet that the spirit of that goal of providing a well-rounded education. And you're going to want to really be specific about which programs and partners are ready to help. If you are a project learning tree coordinator, for example, obviously you're going to want to share the specific professional development and classroom resources that can help schools achieve their academic goals and provide enrichment for students. If you're working in a district where there's some activity happening, but this is an opportunity to really scale up that work, then you want to really emphasize the specifics of the type of programming that might be already in place in pieces. And we do have communications templates that you can really customize to those programs and opportunities. So a little bit more on some of the resources that we have posted, and we're hoping to kind of build on this as we come across new information. So I'm happy to take your feedback in terms of what else would be useful. But on NAAEE's website right now, we do have an updated 2018 fact sheet on EE in the Every Student Succeeds Act. There is a sample letter or email to superintendents about the opportunity. We have put together some talking points that you can incorporate into your conversations and communications with school district leaders. We've also linked to a really comprehensive timeline from the Council of Chief State School Officers that I know I have found really particularly helpful, and I think it's really worth sharing. Then, as I mentioned, we have the analysis conducted by Stanford University of what all the vast world of peer-reviewed research tells us about the benefits of environmental education for K-12 students. And we have that in a variety of formats, you know, including summaries or links to individual studies. So you can really leverage that array of research in order to make the case for effective environmental education. And then we have a Superintendent's Environmental Education Collaborative, and that is outreach that we've been doing with our partners at Project Learning Tree and Upstream Alliance, really jumping off of the success of getting environmental education language included in the Every Student Succeeds Act, wanting to communicate with a network of superintendents about the opportunity to use funds for environmental education. And with that collaborative, we have a link to a map of superintendents that have so far identified themselves as champions for environmental education across the country. And this is a tool that would be valuable for you if you don't really have existing relationships with school district leaders and you're looking for leaders in your state who might be looking to partner with the environmental education community to expand or replicate or scale up EE programs for their schools. And I see that we have a bunch of items in the chat box, so I'm going to open that up and see if I can answer some questions. But I do want to just, you know, caveat that I'm sharing my email address here. And as you go, I'd really love to be able to meet your needs as best we can. So if you have additional questions, I'm always available. Again, we would really appreciate feedback on other tools that might be useful. And as well, as you're reaching out to your school district leaders, we'd love to hear how it's going. So what kinds of feedback are you getting? What questions are you having? You know, and definitely as we move into the application process, we really want to make sure that we're capturing any successful use of ESSA funding for environmental education. Sai has been including some links in the chat box to some of the resources that I've mentioned, so do check those out. Let's see, there's a question here about who is eligible to make an application for funds. So in the case of the Title IV Part A funds that we've been focused on, it is the local education agencies who are eligible to make an application. They are encouraged as part of the language in the legislation to rely on partners, and they're certainly encouraged and required in some cases to engage stakeholders in decisions and planning processes about the use of funds. But these are funds that are specifically for the districts. The Title IV Part B 21st Century Community Learning Centers grant program that we didn't focus on today here is actually a program that is formula granted to states and then run by states as a competitive grant program. And in that instance, partners are eligible to apply for those funds in addition to schools or school districts. So Katie shares some things that she learned doing some state level research. She says our state posted preliminary applications for Title IV Part A, so you may be able to find information about how much money each state is going to get on their website. If you are hunting for state-specific due dates for school district plans, you might look for a consolidated application on your State Department of Education's website. Ours is due June 30th. In our state, they didn't have a specific application for each title funds. So Katie, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And I would love for others to share that kind of information. A couple things that Katie mentions are really important to be aware of. In many cases, the consolidated application that state departments of education require use the same template, if you will, as an ESSA LEA plan. So the vocabulary is different, but many states are using the exact same template. So whatever sort of planning they require on an annual basis anyway, they've built the Title IV Part A piece into that. Another thing I want to just say about what Katie mentions is that so her her state seems to be working, from what I can understand, kind of a little bit more efficiently in accordance with that July 1 disbursement of funds from U.S. Department of Ed to the states. So they're requiring their plans by June 30th. I reached out to my home state Department of Education here in Maryland, and they are not planning to require, as I understand it, they're not planning to require applications until they have the federal funds in hand. And so they'll be looking to do something later in the summer in time for funding distribution in the fall. And one of the reasons why they feel comfortable with that delayed timeline is because, as you all may be aware, we have been completely skewed in terms of the overall federal budget timeline for a number of years now. And as a result, states didn't receive their fiscal year 2017 funding for ESSA until we were well into the fiscal year. And as a result, that combined with the fact that the legislation was really new and there is a delay in just implementation overall, means that states have actually been given a full year's extension to spend out their fiscal year 2017 funding. So the logic is that it's okay if they're late getting started in spending their FY18 funding because everything's delayed. And that can complicate things because you can wind up actually with a delay that goes on for years. But my point being that while the general timeline that I shared should be roughly appropriate for each state, there will be nuances in individual states that shift those timelines. Okay, and then Katie says that their Department of Education will request revisions to applications and modifications can be made through August. Can you repeat the comment about nonprofit community organizations that partner? Okay, so Fred, I was referring to the Title IV Part B grant programs. I think this is the question you're asking for clarification on. Those are the 21st Century Community Learning Centers programs. Those are programs that provide after school and out of school time, / summer programming for primarily high need students. And in the case of those funds, states run those programs as a competitive grant program, and partners, in addition to, so program providers, in addition to schools or school districts, can apply for those funds. If you're a partner, you have to be working with a school or a district in order to be eligible for those funds, but you can be the applicant and the recipient of the funding if you have programs that you're providing. I should note that, and this is one of the reasons why it's such a different process from the Title IV Part A funds, that in most instances that I'm aware of, states award those grant dollars in multiple year increments. So they might run a competition only every 3 or every 5 years. And it's not, so it's a slightly different annual process once the funding gets to the state level. And in some cases, you have to be an approved provider. So that's a step to consider. If you're thinking about applying for those kinds of funds, you need to find out what your state's requirements are for being on their list of approved providers. So it looks like we've sort of exhausted the questions in the chat box. I'll wait just another minute to see. So again, folks, thank you for being here with us today. We really just wanted to do like a sort of a quick update on where we are, really underscore the opportunity that we have ahead of us and the window of time to really reach out to your school districts. We have these resources posted on our website right now, but I'm also going to sort of package them in a list of links and post them on eePRO along with this webinar. Again, please feel free to reach out to me directly if you want to talk more about the Every Student Succeeds Act and environmental education. We would really value the kind of information that Katie shared about Colorado from any of you that are able to glean additional detail from your state. And again, feedback about what other tools would be useful is always welcome. Thanks, everybody.